Stop scrolling. Before you spend a 1971 quarter, turn it over and look at it carefully. That little piece of metal may look like nothing more than 25 cents, but certain 1971 Washington quarters have reached prices that can make collectors stop in their tracks. One documented 1971 D example, graded MS-68, reached $4,160 at auction. A 1971 example, graded MS-65, has an even more surprising auction record of $8,812 at $50. And that is where this story gets interesting, because those numbers do not belong to every 1971 quarter. They belong to specific coins with specific characteristics and exceptional grades. So the real question is not, is a 1971 quarter worth thousands? The real question is much more exciting. Could the 1971 quarter in your collection be one of the unusual ones? The story begins with a small box. It had been sitting inside an old closet for years. Nobody remembered who put it there. Nobody knew exactly what was inside. The box belonged to a man named Daniel, a quiet collector who had spent most of his life searching through old American coins. He wasn't rich. He didn't own a massive collection. He didn't have a famous name in the coin world. He simply loved looking at old change one evening while cleaning a storage room. Daniel noticed the box behind several old books. It was covered in dust. The cardboard was soft from age. The lid was slightly damaged. He almost threw it away. Then he noticed something written on the side. That stopped him. He opened the box. Inside were dozens of old coins, pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters. Some were dark from age. Some were heavily worn. Others looked surprisingly clean. Daniel started sorting them across the table. He wasn't expecting anything spectacular. He had searched enough coins to know that most finds are ordinary. Then he picked up a quarter. The date caught his attention. He placed it under the lamp. At first glance, it looked normal. The portrait was familiar. The lettering looked correct. The rim looked intact. Nothing screamed rarity, but Daniel had learned something important during years of collecting. Never make a decision from one glance. He turned the coin, looked at the reverse, then the edge, then the date again. He placed it next to another 1971 quarter. The difference was subtle. One coin looked worn. The other had sharper details. The surfaces were cleaner. The original appearance seemed much stronger. Daniel reached for his magnifying glass. Now the coin began to reveal tiny details. Every mark became visible. Every contact point stood out. The surface wasn't perfect, but it was much better than most old quarters he had seen. He immediately grabbed his notebook. At the top of the page he wrote, Saint-Anne-21, Washington quarter. Then he wrote, check mint mark, check condition, check for varieties, check authenticity, and finally do not clean. That last line was important. Collectors know that cleaning an old coin can damage its original surfaces and hurt its collector appeal. Daniel had seen people make that mistake before. They find an old coin. They think it looks dirty. They polish it. They scrub it. They try to make it shine. And sometimes they destroy the very qualities collectors wanted to preserve. So Daniel left the coin exactly as he found it. The next morning, he took it to a professional dealer. The dealer placed the quarter beneath a bright lamp. He didn't react immediately. He examined the date, then the mint mark, then the surfaces, then the strike. Finally, he looked at Daniel. Where did you get this? An old box. How long was it stored? Probably decades. The dealer nodded. That explains why it looks this good. Daniel's heart began beating faster. So it's rare? Not necessarily. The dealer paused. That's the part people get wrong. He explained that the 1971 quarter itself isn't automatically rare. Millions of coins exist. Most circulated examples are worth little beyond face value. But exceptional coins can be completely different. A coin preserved in remarkable condition can attract serious collector interest. A specific mint issue can have its own market. A proof coin can be different from a regular circulation strike. And genuine errors or varieties can create another layer of interest. Daniel looked at the coin again. So this could be valuable. It could be collectible. Those aren't always the same thing. That answer stayed in Daniel's mind. Collectible, not automatically priceless, not automatically thousands, but worth investigating. That evening, Daniel began searching through the rest of the box. He found another 1971 quarter, then another. 3 coins from the same year. 3 completely different conditions. The first was heavily circulated. The second was average. The third was the coin he had taken to the dealer. Daniel placed all 3 together, same date, same denomination, different stories, and suddenly he understood something. The date alone wasn't the story. The condition was. The mint mark was. The exact type was. The tiny details were. That was why collectors examined coins under magnification. That was why grading existed. That was why 2 coins that looked identical to an ordinary person could have very different collector interest. Daniel put the 3 quarters into separate holders. Then he wrote one final sentence in his notebook. Find out exactly what this coin is before thinking about what it is worth. He had no idea that this simple decision would lead him to an auction record worth thousands of dollars. And he certainly didn't know that the most important detail on his 1971 quarter was hiding in a place he hadn't checked yet. The next morning, Daniel placed the 1971 quarter back beneath the lamp. He had spent the entire night thinking about one thing. What was hiding inside the coin that he hadn't noticed? He already knew the date. He knew it was a Washington quarter. He knew the condition looked unusually strong. But there was another detail he needed to investigate. The mint mark. Daniel carefully turned the coin toward the light. His magnifying glass moved slowly across the area, beneath Washington's portrait. There it was, a tiny letter, small enough to overlook, important enough to change the identity of the coin. Daniel wrote it down, then he reached for the second, 1971 quarter, different mint mark. The third quarter had another difference. Now the 3 coins weren't simply 3 copies of the same date. They represented different production sources and different histories. Daniel opened his reference books. He began comparing the coins. He checked mintage information. He studied photographs. He read about proof coins. He examined high-grade examples. And then he found something that made him stop. A documented 1971 D Washington quarter, graded MS-68, had sold for $4,160 at auction. Daniel stared at the number. $4,560 for a quarter. But then he looked at the grade. MS is 68. That tiny number was the key. The auction record wasn't proof that every 1971 D quarter was worth thousands. It was proof that an exceptionally preserved example could become a serious collectible. Daniel continued reading. He found another, 1971 Washington quarter, with a documented auction result of $8,912, 50 in MS-65 condition. Now he was even more interested. How could a quarter from 1971 produce such different results? The answer was becoming clearer. Coins are not valued by age alone. A coin can be old and common. Another coin from the same year can be dramatically more desirable because of condition, variety, mint issue, or other characteristics. Daniel looked at his own quarter. He had no idea whether it could compete with those examples. and he refused to assume it could. That was the difference between research and hype. He wanted evidence, so he called the dealer. I found the mint mark. Good. I also found auction records. Even better. Could mine be worth thousands? The dealer laughed. You're asking the same question again. Daniel smiled. I know. Then let me give you the same answer. Don't decide the value before you identify the coin. The dealer invited him back to the shop. Daniel carefully placed the quarter inside a protective holder. He didn't touch the surface with his fingers. He didn't wipe it. He didn't polish it. He didn't try to make it shine. When he arrived, the dealer placed it beneath a professional lamp. This time, he used stronger magnification. He examined the entire surface. Not just the date, not just the mint mark, everything. The cheek, the hair, the lettering, the rim, the fields, the reverse, the eagle, the leaves, the tiny contact marks, every detail mattered. After several minutes, the dealer finally spoke. This coin has something going for it. Daniel leaned forward. What? Preservation. Daniel smiled. That's what I thought. But don't get excited too quickly. The dealer pointed toward a tiny mark. See this? Daniel looked. Yes. That little mark can matter when you're dealing with very high grades. Daniel understood. At ordinary grades, a small mark might barely matter. At the highest levels, tiny imperfections can separate one grade from another. And when only a small number of coins survive at those grades, collector demand can become much stronger. The dealer explained that this was why professional grading could be important. Two people might look at the same coin and call it mint condition. A professional grading service would examine it against established standards. That grade could then become part of the coin's identity. Daniel asked, So should I get it graded? First, let's make sure it's worth submitting. Daniel nodded. They continued examining it. The dealer checked the surfaces again. Then he looked at the strike, then the luster, then the overall preservation. Finally, he placed the coin beside another 1971 quarter. The difference was obvious. Daniel's coin had far fewer signs of circulation. The details were sharper. The surface had a stronger original appearance. It wasn't perfect, but it was interesting. The dealer looked at Daniel. I would have it professionally evaluated, Daniel agreed. The coin was carefully prepared for submission. Then it disappeared into the grading process. And once again, Daniel had to wait. The first few days felt easy. Then a week passed, then another. Every morning, Daniel checked the tracking information. Nothing. He began wondering whether he had become too excited. Maybe the coin would receive an ordinary grade. Maybe the entire discovery would turn out to be nothing more than a nice-looking quarter. And honestly, he was prepared for that because he had learned something during the search. The exciting part wasn't simply the possibility of money. It was the investigation, the hunt, the moment when an ordinary object suddenly demanded a closer look. Then, one afternoon, Daniel's phone buzzed. A message had arrived. The coin had been graded. He stared at the screen for several seconds. He didn't open the result. He knew that once he did, the mystery would be over, finally. He tapped the message. His eyes moved across the screen. The grade appeared. Daniel read it once, then again. He couldn't believe it. It wasn't the highest grade imaginable. It wasn't a magical $1 million discovery, but it was significantly better than the average 1971 quarter. And that was enough to change the conversation. Daniel immediately called the dealer. I got the grade. And Daniel told him. There was a short silence. Then the dealer said, Now we can finally talk about the coin instead of guessing. Daniel smiled. The quarter was officially identified, professionally graded, protected, documented. Now he had something he hadn't had before: evidence. But there was still one problem. The coin was interesting. The grade was strong. The auction records were impressive. Yet Daniel wanted to know something else. What would a real collector actually pay for his coin? That question would take him somewhere he had never expected to go: an auction house. The auction house was larger than Daniel expected. Glass cases lined the walls. Inside them were coins from different generations of American history. Silver dollars, half dollars, old nickels, rare pennies, and Washington quarters that looked almost identical to the one Daniel had carried into the building. He walked slowly through the room. Every display seemed to tell the same story. A coin could begin its life as ordinary pocket change, and decades later, it could become an object that collectors were willing to compete for. Daniel finally reached the specialist's desk. The specialist took the graded 1971 quarter from its protective packaging. He didn't immediately discuss money. Instead, he examined the certification, then the coin itself, then the grade. Interesting piece, Daniel smiled. I've heard that word a lot lately. The specialist laughed. That's because interesting is better than making assumptions. Daniel understood exactly what he meant. He had seen the auction records. He knew about the 4,560 result for a 1971 DMS68. He knew about the 8,812 and $50 result for another high-grade 1971 example. But those numbers belonged to specific coins. His coin had its own identity, its own grade, its own characteristics, and therefore, its own market. The specialist opened a computer database. Let's look at comparable sales. Daniel leaned forward. The screen filled with auction records. Some were surprisingly low. Others were considerably higher. The difference came down to the exact coin and its grade. Daniel watched carefully. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Not a sensational headline. Not a giant number printed on a thumbnail. Actual market evidence. The specialist explained that auction prices can change depending on timing, collector demand, competition, eye appeal, and the specific characteristics of an individual coin. Two coins with the same date can sell for very different amounts. Daniel nodded. So what's mine worth? The specialist looked at him. That's not a single number. Daniel smiled. Of course. It depends on the market. He then explained something Daniel had never considered. Sometimes a collector isn't searching for the most expensive coin. They're searching for a particular coin, a particular grade, a particular mint issue, a particular appearance. And when two collectors want the same piece at the same time, competition can push the final price higher. That was the real excitement of an auction, not knowing the final number until the bidding stopped. Daniel imagined his 1971 quarter sitting beneath an auction room light. One bidder raises the price. Another responds. Someone hesitates. Another bidder enters. The number keeps climbing. Then, silence. Sold. The specialist smiled. That's the part you can't predict. Daniel looked down at his quarter. For years, it had been sitting inside an old box. Nobody had cared. Nobody had even remembered it existed. Now, it had a professional grade. It had documentation. It had a history. And it had a place in the collector market. But before Daniel decided to sell, he wanted to know something more personal. Would you sell it? The specialist looked surprised. That's your decision. I know. But what would you do? The specialist looked at the coin again. If I had found it the way you did. He paused. I'd probably keep it. Daniel smiled. That answer surprised him. After all, he had started this entire journey because he wanted to know how much money the quarter could bring. Now, he was considering keeping it. Why? Because the coin had become a memory. It reminded him of the old box, the dusty room, the first discovery, the research, the dealer, the grading process, the long wait, and the moment he finally saw the grade. Selling it would give him money. Keeping it would preserve the story. Daniel left the auction house without making a decision. On the way home, he stopped at a small cafe. He placed the graded quarter on the table. For a few minutes, he simply looked at it. A 1971 Washington quarter, a denomination of 25 cents. A coin produced decades ago, and yet, it had taken him through a journey he never expected. He opened his notebook. Under the original entry, 71 Washington quarter, he added another sentence. Sometimes the value of a coin begins with curiosity. Then another, never assume. Then another, always verify. Daniel closed the notebook. But when he returned home, something unexpected was waiting for him. His grandfather had found another box. It was much smaller than the first, and much older. Daniel stared at it. Where did you get that? His grandfather pointed toward the attic. It was hidden behind the old cabinet. Daniel carefully opened the lid. Inside, there were only 6 coins. 5 were ordinary, but the 6th was another Washington quarter. Daniel picked it up. The date was almost completely hidden beneath years of grime. He moved it beneath the lamp. His heart stopped. 71. He turned it over. Different mint mark, different condition. And then, he noticed something else. A tiny detail near the design. Something that looked familiar. Daniel reached for his magnifying glass. His grandfather watched him. Another one? Daniel nodded. But this one. He couldn't finish the sentence. The second 1971 quarter appeared to have a feature that the first one didn't. Was it a genuine mint characteristic? Was it damage? Was it a variety? There was only one way to know. Daniel placed both coins side by side. One professionally graded, one freshly discovered. Same year, different story. Different condition, different possibilities. And suddenly, the coin he thought was the end of the story had become the beginning of another one. Daniel picked up his phone. He called the dealer. I found another 1971. The dealer laughed. You're becoming dangerous. Why? Because now you're going to start checking every coin you own. Daniel looked at the 2 quarters. He smiled. Maybe that's the point. He had started with one forgotten coin. Now he had another mystery sitting in front of him. And this time, the suspicious detail wasn't on the surface, where anyone could easily see it. It was hiding in the smallest part of the design, a detail so tiny that thousands of people could have handled the coin without ever noticing. Daniel grabbed his notebook. At the top of a fresh page, he wrote, 1971, coin number 2. Then underneath, he wrote 3 words, look closer. And what he discovered next would finally reveal whether this second coin was simply another old quarter or something collectors would actually want. Daniel placed the second 1971 quarter beneath the lamp and slowly rotated it between his fingers. The coin looked ordinary at first, but after everything he had learned, he no longer trusted first impressions. He examined the date, the mint mark, the lettering, the rim, the portrait, the reverse, and finally the tiny area that had caught his attention. He compared it with the professionally graded 1971 quarter sitting beside it. Same year, same denomination, completely different appearance. The second coin had clearly lived a harder life. Its surfaces showed signs of circulation, and some of the finer details were weaker. But the strange feature near the design was still there. Daniel called the dealer. I need you to look at something. A few minutes later, the dealer arrived. He picked up the coin without saying anything. He examined it under normal light, then under magnification. Then he compared it with reference photographs. Daniel waited. Finally, the dealer looked up. "You're going to want to hear this carefully." Daniel leaned closer. "What is it?" The dealer pointed at the feature. "It is unusual." Daniel smiled. "That's good, right? It means we investigate. Not every unusual mark is an error." That lesson had become almost impossible for Daniel to forget. A scratch can look like a mint error. A damaged rim can look like a striking problem. A stain can look like unusual coloration. A post-mint alteration can look like something created at the mint. That is why identification matters. The dealer continued examining the coin. After several minutes, he gave his conclusion. "This isn't the giant discovery you were hoping for." Daniel laughed. "I knew you were going to say that. But..." The dealer paused. "It is still an interesting coin." Daniel looked at both 1971 quarters. The first one had been professionally graded and had a documented place in the collector market. The second one had a mystery that had led them through another investigation. Neither coin was a guaranteed fortune, but both had taught him something. The dealer then showed Daniel actual auction information for high-grade 1971 Washington quarters. The numbers were impressive. A 1971 D example, graded MS68, had reached $4,560 at auction. Another 1971 example had reached $8,112.50 in MS65. Those results proved that exceptional 1971 quarters can command serious prices. But they also proved something else. You cannot take the highest auction result and apply it to every coin with the same date. That is one of the biggest mistakes new collectors make. They see one coin sell for thousands, then assume the coin in their pocket must also be worth thousands. It doesn't work that way. The exact coin matters. The grade matters. The mint mark matters. The variety matters. The authenticity matters. And the market matters. Daniel finally understood why the dealer had refused to give him a price at the beginning. A price without identification is just a guess. And a guess can turn into a rumor. A rumor can turn into a viral headline. And suddenly people across the internet start believing that every 1971 quarter is a hidden fortune. The truth is much more interesting. Most ordinary 1971 quarters are not worth thousands, but a particularly high-grade example, or a genuinely unusual coin, can be worth significantly more than face value. That difference is what makes collecting exciting. Daniel returned home that evening and placed the 2 quarters on his desk. The first was sealed inside its professional holder. The second remained in a separate protective sleeve. He looked at them for a long time. Then he opened his notebook. On the first page, he had written, 1971 Washington Quarter. Underneath it were all the notes from his original search. The dusty box, the garage, the dealer, the auction records, the grading submission, the waiting, the second discovery, and now, the conclusion. Daniel wrote, "Never chase the biggest number first." He stopped, then added, "Chase the facts." That sentence became the most important lesson of the entire journey, because the real excitement wasn't simply the possibility of finding money. It was the possibility of finding something that had been overlooked. A coin could sit in a drawer for 20 years. It could sit in a jar for 30 years. It could pass through hundreds of hands. And eventually, one person might stop long enough to examine it. That person might notice the date, then the mint mark, then the condition, then a tiny characteristic, and suddenly, an ordinary quarter becomes a question. That question becomes research. Research becomes identification. Identification becomes a real valuation. And sometimes, that journey ends with a coin worth far more than anyone expected. Other times, it ends with a valuable lesson instead. Both outcomes matter. Daniel decided to keep his first 1971 quarter, not because he believed it was going to make him rich. He kept it because it had started the entire adventure. The second quarter stayed with it. 2 coins, 1 date, 2 completely different stories. He placed them inside his collection. Then he walked toward the old box where he had found them. There were still coins inside, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Daniel smiled. He knew exactly what he was going to do next. He was going to check every single one, because after discovering the first 1971 quarter, he had learned something that every serious collector eventually discovers. The coin you are searching for isn't always the one you expect. It may not have an obvious date. It may not shine. It may not look impressive. It may not come with a giant price tag. Sometimes, the most important detail is almost invisible. And that is why you should never throw an old coin away without looking closely. Check the year. Check the mint mark. Check the condition. Check the surfaces. Look for genuine errors and varieties. Compare it with reliable references. And if something truly unusual appears, get a professional opinion. Do not clean it. Do not polish it. Do not scratch it trying to test the metal. And never believe a huge online price without checking an actual market record. Because the difference between a real discovery and an internet rumor is evidence. Daniel closed the box. The 1971 quarters were now safely stored. But the search wasn't over. It had only become more serious. Outside, cars moved through the streets. People paid for groceries. Coins changed hands. Quarters disappeared into pockets. Cash registers opened and closed. Vending machines accepted coins. Millions of ordinary pieces of American currency continued moving through everyday life. And somewhere, right now, a 1971 Washington quarter may be sitting inside an old drawer. Maybe it's completely ordinary. Maybe it's heavily worn. Maybe it's worth only a little more than face value. Or maybe it has survived in an exceptional state of preservation. Maybe it has a genuine variety. Maybe it has a legitimate mint era. Maybe nobody has looked closely at it for decades. You won't know until you check. That is the real mystery. Not every old coin is a jackpot, but every coin gives you a reason to look closer. Daniel picked up his magnifying glass one final time. He opened another box. The first coin inside was a penny, then a nickel, then a dime, then another quarter. He smiled. The hunt continued, and if there is one lesson from the story of the 1971 Washington quarter, it is this: do not let the number on the coin fool you. The date is only the beginning. The real story is hidden in the details. And sometimes, those details can turn 25 cents into a fascinating collector discovery. This is Hidden Coin Digest. If you have a 1971 quarter sitting in your pocket, a drawer, a jar, or an old family collection, don't spend it yet. Take a second look. Check it carefully. Compare it. Research it. And if you find something unusual, you may have just discovered the beginning of your own coin story. Because the next valuable discovery doesn't necessarily belong to a famous collector. It could belong to you, and it might be sitting quietly, right inside your change.